Oh, and here is the USS Enterprise, that's CV6, in hopefully, let's say less than 30 minutes. Okay, let's do 30 minutes. I've been failing to reach 20 minutes. Let's go for 30 minutes. Let's set 30 minutes as our target. It's going to be half an hour. I will make it. Now, Enterprise has always intrigued me, and mainly she started to intrigue me because of a note I read in one book. Because in some books I'd read about her, they don't mention it. In other books, it's a footnote. But in some books, they write it as the British equivalent of the Presidential Unit Citation. And I mean, the thing that intrigued me about Enterprise, and the reason why she has a special place in my heart, and to an extent, a starting point of the reason why probably the Yorktowns are second to Midways for me in terms of my favourite US Navy carriers of World War II, followed by the Saratogas, followed by the Essexes, is the story of the Admiralty Pennant. Because a couple of board members get sent to see Enterprise when she arrives in the UK. And they are aboard, and they're looking at the various awards she's got, the 20 battle stars, all those things going on. And they notice that other people have been giving her awards. And they're looking at each other. This is how the story sort of goes in British mythology when you sort of talk to the unofficial, the people who've remembered the unofficial sources as how it goes on. Not written down in the archives like this, and written down in the archives is going, they made the decision to, as there were two board members aboard, and technically therefore a Admiralty Pennant could be flown, they presented an Admiralty Pennant which was quickly sourced from the nearby naval facilities to Enterprise as a unofficial token of appreciation. Quick bit of naval diplomacy going on there. Just a quick bit. Because Britain doesn't give any awards to ships. And there is precedent for this, because the precedent had been, as long as there were two board members aboard a ship could technically fly it, and we could stick it in its stores. Which means, actually, most of the ships which seem to get them in the 1920s and 30s are submarines being visited by the third Sea Lord, and whichever Sea Lord is responsible for submarines that particular year, to going and inspecting the submarine and checking its frigating working. So, USS Enterprise and a load of submarines are the main constituents who actually can fly the Pennant in the 1920s and she gets hers, of course, in the end of World War II during Magic Carpet, but, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that's the major constituents are them, a few cruisers, and a couple of battleships. And I think one of the Royal Navy aircraft carriers. Oh, it's a fun thing when you look into it. Anyway, that started off my fascination with Enterprise, which was kind of weird, but I was already into aircraft carriers at that point. And I was fascinated by her story anyway, but that one sort of provided my entry point into her career. And as you know, if you've read my book, and this is a part of the Shameless Book Plug, actually it is the Shameless Book Plug, let's just leave it at that and just combine it. I am all about the quirky stories. That's how I got into the tribals. That's how I was enjoying to transition onto the battles and darings. That's how I remember a lot of my ships, is the quirky stories. The entirety of Warspite through the ages, I remember the ships of the ships that have born Warspite by the various quirky stories. And the fact that one of them has no quirky stories, so it's Warspite with her personality removed and is weird. But that might be because she was never taken to war, and so her personality never got to come out. I don't know, but it didn't. Whereas the other Warspites, well, they had a habit of firing guns without even being ordered to, and no one actually doing anything. Cannon are not supposed to go off by themselves, but apparently they can. Well, aboard HMS Warspite. Enterprise is this really cool carrier. And when I say really cool carrier, I mean, you start looking into her history, and you look into her size and her shaping, and you're going, she's good. She's designed to theoretically be 19,800 tons in standard. By October 1943, they're admitting she's 21,000 tons in standard. But apparently, despite the fact she's only gone up 1,200 tons in standard displacement, her full load displacement has gone up from 25,500 tons to 32,000 tons. So that's gone up by 6,500 tons. Now, can tell me and turn around and go, well, actually, no, Alex, that's only 5,300 tons it's gone up by. Because, you know, it's gone up 1,200 tons in standard as well. You are right. But that's still pretty hefty for a ship to have apparently put on in, well, not that many years. Officially, she's put that on since she was commissioned in 1938. So in 5 years, she has put on 1,200 tons standard and an extra 5,360 tons in other stuff. That's a lot. Either someone was fibbing a bit at the beginning, or someone is fibbing by 1943. Or someone is fibbing on both occasions. Just a little bit. A little bit. I will also note that she doesn't look particularly low in the water for a vessel which has apparently gained 5,000 odd tons. Well, no, let's be honest. She's gone up from 25,500 tons fully loaded to 32,000. So she's gone up by 6,560 tons. You'd expect that would have a significant impact on hull performance, putting on over 20% of her displacement. A growth in displacement of 20% should impact your ability to stay out of the water, stay above the water by a significant extent. And with Enterprise, it doesn't seem to. Not that much. Now, her war starts early, and you have to remember this is a vessel which, from very early on, is going to be important. Her design top speed is 32.5 knots. There is sometimes this idea put around that the US Navy didn't start till, I don't know, the late 1950s with, you know, the nuclear submarines only putting out the design speed and saying above 20 knots or something like that, and, you know, those sort of distances. No, the US Navy actually had the policy in the interwar as well. There is a strange period post-World War II, but finishes about mid-1950s, where for some reason the US Navy gets incredibly honest. Not sure what comes over them, really don't understand where it comes from, but they get very honest. Thankfully, they got over that. We can all be happy about it. But in Enterprise's case, this means, along with a lot of the carriers in interwar year, you have to take a pinch of salt with the Admiralty carriers, with all the carriers, basically. All the theoretically treaty-compliant ships take a pinch of salt on the actually declared figures, and the figures which you will see historians quoting, because historians will use the official figures. Because they can source them, they can prove them. They might well have conversations with people and go, really? What was your top speed? And the trouble is as well, especially when you're going with this sort of war period, a lot of the people who did understand and did know these figures did not live that long. Now, people don't turn around and go, well, there are sailors who are still alive who fought on the USS E, the Big E. And they did. They are. But most of the sailors won't know. They'll have an idea, but if you think about that, you would need someone who was watching things very carefully at multiple places to actually figure out what speed it was going on, unless you're relatively senior in the ship, and then you have the experience to know. And most of those people were working very hard in the run-up to war, worked incredibly hard during the war, and then quite a lot of them, like Admiral Cunningham, died not long after the war. They'd finished maybe a round of autobiographies, and then many of them died because they had worked themselves to death. Sometimes I have to explain this, that the number of sources we have are limited because a lot of what was written at the time when they're writing their autobiographies in the immediate period after World War II, etc., and these things, they are still covered by the Official Secrets Act. Some of these ships are still in service. Some of their successor ships are in service and are still critical, and there is an idea of the Cold War coming. So people are being careful. People are being circumspect, and some of the things they are not talking about fully. Now, Enterprise's other big factor to think about is, again, Yorktowns do have some armour. They do have a 2.5 to 4 inch armoured belt. They do have some protective decks. They do have bulkheads. They have some armour on the conning tower. They have some armour over the steering gear. They have some protection. There is this perception that the British build armoured carriers and the Americans don't. No. It's where are you putting the armour on the ship, and how much weight are you able, of the percentage of the ship are you allocating to that armour, which is the differential. And the differential comes down to, as I've said before, the Americans are concentrating on an alpha strike capability, on having the largest carrier possible, because they are thinking about fighting in the Pacific. The British are also thinking about fighting in the Pacific when they're doing their carrier design, but they're also thinking about fighting in the Indian Ocean, in Mediterranean, in the North Atlantic, in the North Sea, in the South Atlantic, possibly in the Arctic, because Russia's always annoying, especially the Soviet Union at this point. In other words, and the South China Sea, to get to their point in the Pacific, they might need to fight. In other words, there is a scenario where the Americans can design oceanic specialist ships. They can design ships around the strike role. They can design all their carriers around that role and fit them for that, because they're going to have to space maneuver, etc., and all these things. And the British go, no, we can't. That's why even HMS Ark Royal, which I'll be talking about in this series as we go on, despite some people going, this is the American-style, Pacific-style carrier, she's not. She's the British strike carrier, and that's the closest thing to what the Americans and Japanese are building, because they have the space and that's the role they're justifying for them. And they're going through the strike profile. So she looks similar because she's built for a similar role. But that doesn't mean she's built for the Pacific, and also doesn't mean that these are built with no idea of the Mediterranean or etc. fighting in closed waters in mind. They still have armour, but that's not going to be the main part of their job. It's where they position the armour, which means, again, if the armour causes more issues, the higher it is above the deck, because the higher the armour is, the more you have to stick in ballast and various other things to stop the ship becoming top heavy. So you think about that, if you have the weight up here, you need weight down here. If you have the weight here, you can sort of have the engines and things can help more balance it out on your ship. So it's height above the water of that weight matters. This is what gives us space to have more aircraft. Now, on average, the phrase is she had 80 to 90 aircraft on board. Please note, that does not mean her air group is 80 to 90 aircraft. That means she has 80 to 90 aircraft on board. She has some stowed in the rafters of the hangars. She has some in boxes. And she has a large group which can fly and operate. That's fine. That's standard for the Americans. Again, because what are they thinking about fighting? They're thinking of fighting across the Pacific because of the logistical needs of it. And this is what she's designed for. This is what she's built around, the idea of fighting across the Pacific. again, you're going to go for a different logistics strategy when you're fighting across the Pacific than if you're fighting up the Pacific, as the British are looking at. This is where the difference in design start to come in. And this is one of the reasons why I like Enterprise. And Yorktowns, because they are built with this in mind, and it is shameless and it is good. They are built with all the lessons and understanding of the Saratogas and Lexington and of their operation. I know I just split them around, but I'm going to leave it in there. Sorry, Saratoga is always sort of more of my favourite than Lexington. I'm just sorry. I do have favourites in ships. I'm not saying they're like my pets, but if I had to pick between plants and ships, ships would win every time. If I was going to pick up one for a pet, one instead of instead of a pet for company. So, she is a special ship, and her class are special. And they're technologically special, which is why they're a key ship. Because I would argue it's from these that the Midways spring. The Enterprise swarm are designed to be a swarm of large carriers, built as quickly and as fast and as capable as the US Navy can manage to organize with the infrastructure industry they have available. These are their peacetime construction. The Midways, I would argue, are the next generation of not quite peacetime construction, but honestly they're building them with full knowledge that they already have the Essex Swarm, and the Essex Swarm are probably going to fight out the war. The Midways are going to be their next generation of carriers. The Midways are basically what the Yorktowns would have been if there hadn't been treaties. Think about that. That shows you how much compromise is being forced by the treaties. And again, the Americans are building stuff which is something which is officially displacing less than 20,000 tons in standard. So if you think about that, from the fact of they have 135,000 tons as your carrier limit. If you can build something which is roughly 20,000, you could get 6 of those and then get a 15,000 ton carrier. Which is pretty much what Ranger is. We can all agree Ranger was not a good place. Okay, we can agree. Wasp at 15,000 tons was a slightly better place to land than Ranger, and Wasp certainly was a cuter ship. But the Yorktowns were it. Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. And Enterprise, well, she's the one who survives it all. She survives the war. Yorktown, sunk by a submarine following the Battle of Midway. Hornet, sunk following the Battle of Santa Cruz. Yorktown, 6th of June 1942. Hornet, 26th of October 1942. Incalculable losses is because these are truly capable ships. Enterprise is important technologically because she's one of the first 14 ships to receive the RCA CXAM-1 radar. She has aircraft and she has radar. She's actually used in the filming of a movie in 1941, dive bomber, starring Errol Flynn and Fred McMurray. I had never heard of him before I was looking at researching this video, and apparently he's appeared in over 100 movies, so I'm going to have to look those up at some point, because it sounds an interesting movie. Dive Bomber is also a movie. I was looking it up to try and see if I could find a copy to watch before this video, and I'm not going to get this done in 30 minutes, am I? But I couldn't, which is so sad. But she was based at San Diego at that time, and then she was moved to Pearl Harbor as part of Roosevelt's plans to forward base the fleet. At which point, the admiral, the same admiral who got blamed for Pearl Harbor, Husband E. Kimmel, who of course I have done a video about, basically used that time to try and get us trained up as he physically could. He had them out at sea as often as he could. And that was also his form of protection. He was keeping every ship he could out to sea because he didn't trust Pearl Harbor as a base. He was right. His predecessor in post had also not trusted it and actually fought back and said, no, we need to return to San Diego. This place is not secure. And had been dismissed by the president, despite being possibly the best officer in the US Navy for dealing with the Japanese. Nimitz turned the job down because he knew it was a poisoned chalice, and then poor Kimmel gets the job. And of course Nimitz takes over the moment Kimmel is dismissed. She wasn't at Pearl Harbor when the attack took place, because she had departed on the 29th of November 1941 to deliver Marine Fighter Squadron 211 to Wake Island. She had been due to return to Hawaii on the 6th of December 1941, but was delayed by weather, and was still at sea, roughly 200 nautical miles west of Oahu, on the 7th of December 1941. Despite this, well, her SBDs, her scouting and bombing squadron, were actually caught in the attack. They had flown off her, 13 from Scout Squadron 6, and 4 aircraft from Bombing Squadron 6 at dawn on the 7th of December to scout an arc extending northeast to southeast of the ship, and then plan to land at Ford Island after completing their search route. As the aircraft arrived in pairs over Pearl Harbor, well, you can imagine what happened. They're caught between both the defensive anti-aircraft fire from ships and the land installations and the Japanese aircraft. I'm still surprised, and this speaks to the quality of the crews involved, that out of the 17 aircraft, only 7 are shot down. Sadly enough, 8 airmen are killed and 2 are wounded, but only 7 out of 17 are shot down. And when you are caught between, quite literally, the devil and the deep blue sea, in this scenario, i.e. enemy fighter aircraft, and your own defences firing at you, to lose only 7 out of 17 is pretty darn good flying. Now, Enterprise received radio messages from Pearl Harbor during the attack, and she knew they were under attack, and she just launched an airstrike based on a report of a Japanese carrier to the southwest of her location. The strike, launched at 1700 hours, consisted of 6 F-4F Wildcat fighters, 18 Douglas TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 6 SBDs. Now, we can all be very, very happy for those 30 aircraft. They did not locate anything. Sadly enough, when the Wildcats, which were directed to Hickam Field on Oahu, yeah, I think Oahu. I'm mispronouncing that probably terribly, but the more I think about it, the worse pronunciation is going to get. Although their fighters' appearance had been broadcast, all ships and anti-aircraft units in the area, the Wildcats appearing in the night sky triggered panic firing, and 3 out of 6 were shot down, with 3 pilots being killed and a 4th aircraft running out of fuel, forcing the pilot to bail out. As a result, Enterprise has lost 10 aircraft, and the war is only a few hours old, and most of the aircraft were lost to their own side. She arrived in Pearl Harbor on the 8th of December. Halsey, commander of Carrier Division 2, ordered every able-bodied crewman on board to help rearm and refuel Enterprise. The process normally took 24 hours to complete, but was completed within 7 hours by an extremely motivated crew who probably didn't want to be stuck in harbour looking at the battleship row around them and going, yeah, being stuck here is not a good idea. This place doesn't look secure. Let's get out to sea, boys. That's going to be a few of them thinking that one. As a result, she and the other ships of Task Force 8 sailed on the next morning to patrol against possible additional attacks. The group encountered no surface ships, but she did claim to sink a submarine, the I-70, on the 10th of December 1941. And during the last 2 weeks of December 1941, Enterprise and her escort steamed west of Hawaii to cover the islands, while 2 other carrier groups attempted to relieve Wake Island. On the 11th of January 1942, she went to protect convoys reinforcing Samoa. On the 16th of January 1942, a TBD of VT6, piloted by Chief, i.e. not a commissioned pilot, a Chief, Howard F. Dixon, sadly got lost on patrol, ran out of fuel and ditched. But luckily, they survived. His 2 crewmates, Anthony J. Pastula and Gunner Gene Aldrich, survived for 34 days in a small rubber raft. After their food and water were washed overboard, they drifted ashore on the atoll of Puka Puka, where the natives fed them and notified Allied authorities. They were picked up by the appropriately named USS Swan, which was a Lapwing-class minesweeper, and one of those little boats which gets completely forgotten in World War II, but is actually a really cool story to look up. If you are bored one day, look up the story of USS Swan and what she gets up to in World War II. She has a interesting little career. Dixon was awarded the Navy Cross for his heroism, exceptional determination, and highest quality of leadership. It's always nice to get an award for, well, surviving, and frankly, he needed it and deserved it. Because that's 3 extra crewmen. You have to think about this at this time. In 1942, how difficult is it to get experienced crewmen to generate them and regenerate them? i.e. the ones who've been flying for a couple of years. The people you need to train everyone else mount as you're rapidly expanding your forces. Those people have a value. That's something else you have to think about in operations. And that's something Enterprise's crew seems to always remember, that the people have a value. It has a really interesting culture as a ship. Enterprise's Task Force 8 raided Kawajin, Watcha and Meloop and the Marshall Islands in February 1942. In 2 waves, 64 aircraft attacked and sunk a small gunboat, damaged the light cruiser the Katori, the mine layer Tokiwa, and 5 other ships for the loss of 6 of their own. aircraft. They also managed to destroy airplanes on the ground, other land facilities, and Enterprise itself received only a minor damage in a small Japanese counterattack. In March, now part of Task Force 16, she swept the Central Pacific and attacked again enemy installations on the Wake Island and Marcus Islands. Now, her and Hornet then go and have their spectacular fun. And their spectacular fun is, of course, the Doolittle raid. Yes, when you send Hornet off somewhere, loaded with B-25 Mitchells, so she can't actually launch any of her own aircraft or do anything carrier-like, it's fighters from Enterprise flying combat air patrol and protecting them as they're moving in. This is one of the interesting things that sometimes goes. I've had this conversation with people. They go, oh, the Americans, they send a carrier to launch this raid, and I go, they send 2 carriers to launch this raid. Enterprise goes with Hornet. It's 2 Yorktowns. And there's a reason it's the 2 Yorktowns. Because by and far and away, the best carriers the Americans have at this point are their purpose-built fleet carriers, which are the Enterprise and Yorktown. They are. Saratoga, Lexington, they are lovely ships. They are lovely ships. But they are conversions, and you can tell they're conversions. It's kind of like Courageous and Glorious versus Ark Royal. Or even Illustrious. You're sort of like looking and going, I can tell you are a conversion. You are a good ship, but I can tell you are a conversion. There is something about you which speaks of a confused design history. She then, of course, took part in the Battle of Midway in June 1942, which has been discussed a lot over the years, so I feel I won't be able to make this up to 30 minutes, but I can, sort of jump a bit. I've done videos about Midway, and if I haven't, I'm fairly sure I've got some scheduled for coming up. They might be next year, though. Well, I'm sure I did it last year for the 80th anniversary. Sure I did. I'm sorry, I have just searched my channel. I have had no video published about Midway, but I have put together a PowerPoint, so I will do that at some point, so you will hear about Enterprise's Midway experience when I do the Midway video. Apologies. Now, after that, she took part in various South Pacific campaigns. A good example of this being the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, where the light carrier, the Ryujo, and we're going to call it light carrier, but let's be honest, it was the Japanese attempt to try and sneak something in under the 10,000 ton treaty limit that spectacularly failed because they added another deck on it. See, which video was that in? That was in the burn videos. Burns of other navies. The Japanese troops, therefore intended for Guadalcanal, were forced back, and Enterprise suffered the most of any of the American ships involved in that fight, with 3 direct bomb hits and 4 near misses, killing 74, wounded 95, and serious damage was inflicted on the carrier. Damage control parties secured her and made her able to return to Hawaii under her own power, but she was under repairs in Pearl Harbor from the 10th of September to the 16th of October 1942. Think about that. And also think about the fact that Pearl Harbor could do those repairs. She didn't have to go back to San Diego. If you want a true demonstration of the sheer lack in the attack on Pearl Harbor, or the sort of fact that the openness the Japanese left themselves by not doing the 3rd and the 4th waves, yes, they'd have suffered more losses, but they would have destroyed a lot more and made life a lot more difficult for the US Navy to build back up, even with the Herculean efforts they put in to do so. But by this point, they are able to repair quite extensive damage on Enterprise, and yes, it takes them over a month. But that's still good. And they get the ship back in service. And this time, she goes to sea with Air Group 10 embarked. And this time, of course, she has the Grim Reapers, aka VF-10. I do love American squadron names, the Grim Reapers. It's a good group. You know, it's a good group. This time she goes out, she takes part in the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands, and, well, she scouted a Japanese carrier force, she managed to locate it, her aircraft struck the carriers and cruisers during the struggle, and she herself was struck. She was hit twice by bombs, losing 44 men and 75 wounded. And again, she remains in action, taking on board quite a number of the aircraft and crew from her sister ship Hornet when she was lost in action. And this battle is important because whilst the Americans lost stuff, it's a sort of strategic victory, because they managed to reinforce Guadalcanal against the next enemy attack. And nearby Henderson Field was secure from Japanese bombardment. However, the loss of Hornet meant that Enterprise was now the only, and I want to phrase this, it's kind of like I am a functioning insomniac, and you can tell when I've had less sleep or more sleep, I'm fairly certain, on this channel. But she was now the remaining functional carrier. But remember, this is a carrier which has been damaged, which has already had to be rebuilt as this war has gone on. And this is a ship which is, for all the want in the world, was designed to be able to trade space for protection, in terms of space of sea maneuver. That hadn't been possible. This is the thing. Once you get into fights which are over protecting islands and stopping people getting and attacking islands, you limit down your ability to maneuver. It's one of those cruel things of fate. The US Navy designed their ships to be able to for a maneuver fleet of action and operational action. The Royal Navy designed their ships to be tied down. And one finds themselves fighting wars more often not of maneuver, and the other one finds themselves getting tied down. And when they are done that, that's when they get into trouble. Now, Enterprise managed to get to New Caledonia on the 30th of October for repairs, but the Japanese decided that they were going to make a thrust at the Solomons. And this meant if they're going to make a thrust at the Solomons, the Enterprise has to arrive, because, you know, it's just, you have to welcome your guests, and you can't, just because you're injured, if the guests turn up at your door, you still have to go to the door. And so Enterprise had to go to the Solomons to say hello. It's only polite. It is. Now, luckily, she takes on some extra repairers to repair her while she's underway to the Solomons. This includes roughly 75 Seabees from the 3rd Construction Battalion. The Seabees basically focused on trying to get the ship, along with the crew, as ready for the upcoming battle they were sailing to on her as quickly as they could do. Lieutenant Commander Herschel Albert Smith, the Enterprise's damage control officer, basically spends the next 72 hours living off coffee and adrenaline. As such, Captain Osborne Bennett, aka Ozzie B. Obby Hardison, well, I think it's Ozzie B. or Obby, or it could be Ozzie B. Obby. Sorry, my notes are weird. Hardison notified the US Navy that the emergency repairs accomplished by this skillful, well-trained, enthusiastically energetic force have placed the vessel in condition for further action against the enemy. What I do not note in the message he sent to them was the request for the metric megaload of coffee to replace whatever they'd consumed which had been on board previously. Because that is the only way I can accept them actually managing to achieve it. I'm thinking they weren't just drinking coffee. I think there was possibly permanent funnels set up and it being poured down their throats. Or perhaps things stronger than coffee were being used. There are options available in the US Navy at this time. But I would like to think it was coffee. This actually managed to win the praise of Halsey, which is notoriously interesting to get. And he sent a dispatch to the officer in command of the Seabees. Your commander wishes to express to you and the men of the construction battalion serving under his appreciation for the services rendered by you in effecting emergency repairs during action against the enemy. The repairs were completed by these men with speed and efficiency. I hereby commend them for their willingness, zeal, and capability. A subtext is, I will now demand even more from every CB I ever meet than I already have been demanding. Don't worry. On this occasion, well, Enterprise manages to find and sink a Congo-class, the Hai, and it's the first Japanese capital ship lost during the war. When the naval battle of Guadalcanal ends on the 15th of November 1942, Enterprise can claim the sharing in the sinking of 16 ships and damaging of 8 more. In other words, I think she can consider she has started on her list of avenging for Pearl Harbor. On the 4th of December, well, she was training near Espiritu Santo in New Hebrides, and then she stays there until the 28th of January 1943. She's given a bit of a peaceful Christmas by the Japanese. Who would know they'd be so thoughtful? And really, they should be, because, let's be honest, Enterprise has been so welcoming to them, so friendly to them. And then she departs for the Solomons. And on the 30th of January, her fighters were providing combat air patrol for the Cruiser-Destroyer Group, the Surface Action Group, for want of another phrase, fighting in the Battle of Rennell Island. The fighters managed to destroy most of the Japanese aircraft. Unfortunately, the Chicago was sunk by aerial torpedoes. And this is, of course, the Northampton-class Chicago, which is sunk. After the battle, she goes back to Espiritu Santo, probably going, what happened? Why was my Christmas holiday so good and now they're doing this? And they actually got one of the ships I was protecting. That's annoying. Well, she gets a new captain, Captain Samuel Ginder, on the 16th of April. And then she sails to Pearl Harbor on 27th of May 1943, when Admiral Chester Nimitz will present the ship with the first Presidential Unit Citation ever awarded to an aircraft carrier. With the now Essex-class and Independence-class carriers joining the Pacific Fleet, Enterprise was relieved of duty, and 20th of July she entered what I'm reliably informed I'm supposed to pronounce as Puget, rather than Puget, or Puget, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, for an overhaul. Thank the Lord. She receives, thankfully, an extensive refit, which includes a lot of upgrades, new anti-aircraft weapons, anti-torpedo blisters, and this is the refit where she would receive her 6s on the flight deck. The things which really say, look, we matter. But also show the changing nature of the US Navy. Because when she entered service, she had been one of a few. Very few. Yes, she was CV6. All but CV1 were still in service as carriers, and CV1 had been converted to a seaplane carrier. CV2, 3, 4, 5 were all around. CV7 and 8 were not that far away. When she enters service, the operational US Navy carriers can be numbered on one hand. In simple terms, you don't need to paint large numbers on your ship. You don't, because if you're landing on a carrier, that's probably your carrier, because that's the only carrier you can see. Once you're operating in multi-carrier groups, that's when you need the numbers painted on your ship. That's when you need some sort of symbology that shows it's a different ship. And that's where we're going to finish the Enterprise story, really, because I think for her, how do I put this? Her defining glories are the fact she fights her way through the war, but also during the war, where she is the only carrier available. Where she is it. Where if you don't have her, you don't have effing. And that was anything, by the way. That's Enterprise. The rest of the time where she slowly morphs from being a Premier Strike carrier to a night fighter carrier and all sorts of other duties. That's the war as it goes, but what she does during the war is when she's standing alone, when she is the ship going from place to place. In every single major operation, Enterprise is there. Enterprise matters. And then she gets to take part in Operation Magic Carpet at the end of the war. She gets to bring GIs home. She is a hero ship, and she's still performing service. And then you have this. And nothing shows the bigger difference than the world that has taken place than the ship you have, which was launched in 1938. Well, launched in 1936, commissioned 1938. Got my launching and commissioning dates the wrong way around. And the USS Independence, here, which was launched in 1958, 20 years after Enterprise was commissioned. 61,000 tons standard, 81,937 tons fully loaded. In other words, displacing more than 3 times what Enterprise had. That is a lesson of a world war. That is a lesson of the changing role of carriers. That is also a lesson of the growing size of aircraft. The aircraft you started off with in 1938. Well, you could carry 90 aboard. When Independence comes into service, she can carry an air group of between 70 and 90. Again. But to do so, and it's quite tight on her, she is 3 times the displacement. Three times. What's sad, and I will say this is sad, is because I expect something better from the US Navy and the US, because they did manage to save so many ships. They did manage to save so many ships. But most of the ships that are saved, other than Texas, etc., are ships which were mothballed after World War II. And the thing about Enterprise is at no point can you make the case to mothball her, because no one wants to reactivate her for a war. Yes, she's a recognized ship. Yes, she's a hero ship. Yes, she has all sorts of qualities, but no one would like to send people to sea in her again. No one wants to pay to upgrade her. No one wants to do a midway conversion to her. You can do that on the midways. They're what the Yorktowns would have been if there hadn't been for the treaty system. You can't do the same with the structure of the Enterprise. Basically, to do it, you would have to... Honestly, you would be doing one of those major refits, which the British Admiralty did in the Age of Sail, where the only thing that pretty much survives is some of the wood is in the same place, and might be even the original wood, and the nameplates. Other than that, everything else is new. It was appropriate, though, that the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier was called the Enterprise, and also nicknamed the Big E. And it is very nice that, as currently planned, CVN-80 will be USS Enterprise. I have to say, I would have probably preferred it if it had been the Enterprise class, because I'd have felt that was sort of the name. But again, that's me being picky, because I think the name deserves to be the name of the class, not just number 3 in the class. But I suppose there again, if you're the US Navy, and if you want to make your very expensive, very capable, but very expensive class to be mostly uncancelable, then naming them the Gerald R. Ford as the first one, well, Ford isn't uncancelable, but it's the first one, so it'll probably get built. But then naming them the John F. Kennedy, the Enterprise, and the Doris Miller, that's a pretty good set to make sure that people are unlikely to cancel them. An Enterprise was laid down in April 2022. She's scheduled for launching in November 2025. Those are tickets I would love to have. And she's scheduled for commissioning in 2028 sometime. And I am sure, considering the career her predecessors of that name have had, she will also end up with an eventful career. Hopefully not quite as eventful as the first couple of years of war were for the first carrier to bear the name. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I haven't quite made it to a full hour, but this was close, and I had a feeling this could end up being a 90-minute video, which is one of the reasons why I have tried to keep it as short as this, because I'm trying to keep them less than an hour. Well, they're supposed to be 20 minutes. And I have so many to record, but if these were supposed to be the quick ones, I could record, about... write them all up, record about a dozen in a day in 6 hours recording, and, everything be fine, and it's actually turning out maybe get 3 done a day, and it's, that's taking a lot longer, but leave that to one side. I'll get all the videos done. Ryan, question. I suppose it's this. And we don't have anything like Ultimate Animal Dreadnoughts, etc. Well, there is a couple of programs, actually, that people can do. As I am UAD, I have been looking at them, but I haven't procured them yet, or looked at, or sort of set that up. But the thing I was going to suggest was taking as your points of design the Midway class, the Malta class, Ark Royal, the Illustrious class, and the Yorktown class. I'm wondering if you could tell me what you think the dream carriers for the US Navy and the Royal Navy would have looked like. And I'd love to hear what you think their differences and similarities would have been. Because I think both navies would be a lot more similar than we necessarily think, but they'd have still been different. It would have still been distinct. And the reason I say that is because as many similarities as they have in naval architecture and naval development, there is the differences. The more you maximize the ability of the freedom of them to build what they want, the more you are going to maximize the differences caused by their geostrategic situation. So they're going to build similar because they're going to build bigger ships, they're going to have armored decks, they're going to have that armor level, they're going to be bigger and faster and carry bigger air groups. But I wouldn't be surprised as the British is still orientated around being able to do that sort of operation, that constant air operation, the constant sort of movement of aircraft, and the US naval carrier is still orientated around doing the big boom as their primary. So the British will be, we do this, and then we can also do this, and the American will be, we do this, but we can also do this if we need to. So one has Constant Strike as their primary, Alpha Strike as their secondary role, the other one would have Alpha Strike as their primary, Constant Operation as their secondary. Much like how US carriers and Royal Navy carriers developed during the World War II, honestly. But I think they'd still have that sort of differential. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This is supposed to come out on the check Excel spreadsheet on the 17th of June. Tomorrow is going to be HMS Nubian, which will be a premiere, and on Monday it's HMCS Hyder's Common Response, and on Tuesday it's Building the Fleets of Midway, which might explain why I have a Midway and I thought I'd done Midway. Ah, yeah. I have a video scheduled about Midway. That's where it's come from. See, I'm not going completely nuts. It's always a possibility, but I'm not. I'm not. And where are we on Australia Mount? Well, let me just check our public calendar, because today, of course, will be when this comes out. This will come out on the... Again, why I keep losing the date, I do not know. On the 17th. And on the 17th, we are in Sydney. We are At the Naval Museum in Sydney, we are looking at HMS Vampire and all the ships there, and we will be there until at least the 20th. Thank you very much for your support, and I'm over now. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for all your help. And thank you for making the dreams possible. Take care, and have a nice day.